All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Hope you all having a good game speed so far. Yesterday was amazing, and today, sessions this morning. We're good? Can you just check your mics? They just want to see.
Test.
We're good. Thank you. So we are going to have a conversation about something a little different. We're going to be talking about disinformation and games. And I'm really pleased to be joined by Carla and Paul, both of whom have been working with the games industry or in the games industry for years, and have some projects that related to this and some thoughts that we want to share with you. So let's first introduce yourselves, and then I'm going to jump in with some questions. All right, Carla, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hey, everyone. My name is Carla Reyes. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the founder and creative director at Anima Interactive, which is a small, independent, socially conscious game studio. We're currently developing a game called Take Us North, which follows the journeys of migrants and asylum seekers on their way to cross the U.S.-Mexico border. So obviously a very heavy-hitting topic, but one that we're tackling very sensitively and respectfully, and excited to dig into that a little bit more.
Hi, everyone. I'm Paul Fisher. I'm a responsible AI manager and advisor with Accenture, but relevant for this conversation, for the last 6 years, I was with the State Department, and for the last 2.5 or 3 or so of those years, working on games and media literacy to counter disinformation.
All right, this is going to be a really interesting conversation. We're touching on some sensitive topics. But first, before... You're good?
Yeah.
No, I'm good. Thank you. All right, but before we jump in, Paul, you worked at the State Department in a group called the Global Engagement Center, right? Can you tell us a little bit about what that was? And then I'd like you to also address disinformation and misinformation, something that people often get confused.
Right. That's a really important point. So let's start with the definitions first, right? Misinformation, everyone misspeaks, right? A slip of the tongue, a million becomes a billion, or whatever it is. Disinformation is you are intent on deceiving, right? You are intentionally trying to spread false information. So that's the really important distinction. The Global Engagement Center, or the office formerly known as the Global Engagement Center, it no longer exists as of about a month and a half or so ago. Was stood up initially around 2016 to counter terrorist propaganda and disinformation. And then it evolved to work on state and non-state actor propaganda and disinformation. And we exclusively worked overseas targeting non-Americans, right? So we did not do any work domestically. This was exclusively about threat actor, disinformation, and propaganda targeting overseas people.
Okay, so we live in an era, right, where truth feels, more elusive, contested than ever. Why? I'll ask Carla this question. Why do you think video games are uniquely positioned to address this? And Paul, of course, please chime in for how you end up getting involved.
Yeah, so I think, video games are the most immersive art form and really have the ability to foster empathy and, really reach people emotionally as well. And I think that it can capture the nuance and complexity of subject matters that, mainstream media might not be able to do because you're living in that world, right? So it's, simulations of reality or anything like that. And I think that makes it a really powerful tool. Also, the fact that video games are the largest entertainment medium in the world. So anything that is mimetic through social media, et cetera, well, video games is inherently and inextricably tied to that as well. And so we have a responsibility as game creators to deal with the information that people are receiving and make sure that if we are portraying something that is rooted in reality, that we are portraying it responsibly.
Yep. It's interesting. We'll get to the communities within gaming as well, because there's a lot that happens in that space. But Paul, I always found it remarkable, and we've worked together in my role at Games for Change, how the State Department decided to identify games as a tool in which they want to explore, addressing these issues. How did they come to that?
Yeah, that story goes back to 2019. We had a program called Tech Demos, and I should have said this at the top, that the Global Engagement Center was structured both regionally and functionally. So we looked at how threat actors spread propaganda and disinformation and who those actors are around the world, as well as the technological means by which they do that. So in 2019, we had a program called Tech Demos, in which we invited technology companies to come and demonstrate their technologies for an interagency audience, so not just State Department, but other law enforcement, DoD, and intelligence community agencies. How that technology could be used to either understand the threat landscape or in some way build resilience to threats. So in 2019, a game studio called Tilt or Droog, they're based in the Netherlands, they came and demoed a game called Get Bad News. Get Bad News is based in the science of pre-bunking, which is the idea that I can intentionally expose you to a piece of propaganda or disinformation, but that's apolitical, non-judgmental, and empowering, right? So that led us to then start developing our own game. So our first game was Harmony Square, in which you're spreading propaganda and disinformation about pineapple on pizza and a threat of a bear in a community in which there are no bears. Sort of reminiscent of a particular Simpsons episode. From there, we went to a game called Cat Park, in which you're spreading disinformation about an outrageous public works project, a park for cats. Why is the government spending money on a park for cats? Can you believe it? So let's tear this thing down using memes, manipulated media, and sensational language, spreading conspiracy theories and disinformation and heightening polarization. And we know that both of those games had a statistically significant impact on the abilities of players to discern between reliable and unreliable information.
So this is all framed. You mentioned media literacy earlier. Can you explain that? Where that sits? Because sometimes when people think about media literacy, it's like a graduate course, on film and television.
Yeah, I mean, we all need to be able to distinguish between fact and opinion, right? And the media ecosystem now intentionally blurs those lines because sensational headlines get clicks. So our games are not intended to help players say, or rather, in our games, we are not saying this is true, this is false. That's not what we do. The State Department doesn't want to be the arbiter of truth. Instead, the State Department is trying to equip players with the skills to make those sorts of determinations for themselves.
Yeah, all right, thank you for clarifying that. And Cat Park is a remarkable game.
Yeah, Games for Change Civics Game of the Year Award winner, 2023.
Yes, it was. I would definitely check it out. I want to kind of dive into a little bit more about the myths and false narratives, because you did say that, the State Department isn't the arbiter of truth. Right. Well, it's a question. But that's what you didn't set out to do that. Right, but are there false narratives that that are prevalent within the gaming ecosystem?
I don't know about the gaming ecosystem in particular.
Right, let's add another part of the question. And how can games be an intervention?
So let me start maybe then with what the threats are that we have identified where games are vulnerable to the spread of propaganda and disinformation, right? So games are this incredible interactive media, right? Instead of a movie or a show about World War II, why not be the soldier liberating, Normandy on D-Day, right? That's a much more impactful experience.
Reminds me of the game This War of Mine.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Let's invert the experience and understand what
really
people are going through.
Example. Right, and that game, This War of Mine, isn't grounded in any one particular conflict, right? It is sort of evocative of conflicts in general, but it is not meant to represent a singular historical conflict, right? But that is a particular vulnerability where if somebody wanted to distort historical events and misrepresent them in a game, depicting something and representing it as truth, right, where you're not providing sort of the disclaimers that this information is meant to be playful and educational, but not necessarily historically accurate. That reframing of reality is incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, I was going to say I agree with that, and I think it echoes the sentiment that I mentioned earlier. And what we're trying to do with Take Us North, because it is rooted in a subject matter that is reality, and there's a specific historical and cultural context around it, right? Well, it's not set in a specific year, but it's generally the last few decades, and what can we do to ensure that we are making those disclaimers, and parts of it are fictionalized, but a lot of it is just rooted in reality, and incorporating documentary footage and real world footage. And I think that we have to be able to communicate to the players that this is real or this is not, and it's a challenge, right? It's a game design challenge, but it's something that I think I'd be curious, Susanna, what you've seen from any of the other projects through Games for Change, or also Paul, what you've seen in how they've handled that as well.
I wasn't prepared to answer any questions today.
I'll tee you up, and you could talk about Venba.
Okay.
I think is a great game.
Oh yeah. Okay, so Venbai was a game that also won a Games for Change award. It was produced in India, if I'm thinking about the right game. Yes, and it dealt with. Oh, now I'm gonna have to.
It's the first generation immigrant experience.
Yes, yeah. I mean, that in itself is putting yourself, in the shoes and understanding what people are going through. Games like Bury Me My Love too gives you that opportunity to experience, the life of people that are struggling in parts of the world that you haven't experienced. You know what? I'm going to. I have so many questions, so I don't want to like be the one.
Sorry, I didn't mean
it's
to
okay. But I appreciate it, Carla. But I want to go and talk to you as a game developer, right? So you are a game developer. You're choosing to create a game that is inviting people into a world to understand what people are going through. And I think it's so fascinating about how you're working with the community. Can you talk about that, and also like what storytelling techniques or narrative structures you're using to explore that?
Yeah, thanks. So we're very deeply rooted in research, as I mentioned. So for context, the game is primarily set in the Sonoran Desert, which is between Arizona and Mexico. And it's one of the deadliest migrant trails in the world, because migrants have to face extreme heat, extreme cold, and there are deterrence policies, like prevention through deterrence. So these are U.S. Border Patrol policies that really weaponize the terrain and essentially make it incredibly challenging for people to cross. And then they end up, getting incredibly ill or losing their lives due to it. And so we've been, I've been going down to the borderlands and walking along those trails, working closely with humanitarian groups, but also closely with migrant shelters in the area, and conducting extensive interviews. So I've been, visiting the shelters and conducting dozens of interviews, also conducting them remotely. And a lot of that is weaving into the project, whether through, obviously, because many of these people are asylum seekers and are in hiding, everything is anonymized. And so, there are fictionalized portions of that. But then we are trying to explore ways that we can actually incorporate the raw footage from these interviews, because I think that has a really emotional impact for people, right? If they are going through this experience in the game, but then actually hearing the testimonials from real world people, and always ensuring that even though you are in a fictional world, quote unquote, that by the end of the experience or throughout the experience, you are reminded that this is real. And that's one of the ways that we're doing it.
Paul, when you were building Cat Park, you talked about the debunking, right, approach, which is creating fictionalized scenarios.
And pre-bunking. Yeah.
Did I say pre-bunking? I said debunking. I meant pre-bunking, yes. So how have you been able to address different cultures and localization? Because, the situation of a cat park in a city may be very different in Mumbai or another part of the world.
Quick story time. When we were localizing the game in Arabic for Middle East and North African audiences, I was talking to an artist in Jordan. They're like, so cat parks aren't really a thing here. And I said, yes, I know, they're not a thing here either, because the cats would run away. So yeah, it is like a complicated piece of like, how do you, like the localization that we can do, the game is still called Cat Park. We're sort of like tinkering around the edges. But let's see, I'm trying to remember. I think what we ended up doing for the Middle East and North African version of Cat Park was that rather than it being explicitly a park for cats, it was like a children's park that was taken over by cats.
How terrible.
That's
right.
Dangerous. And then so this led to a conspiracy theory that like, the NGO that built the park is actually a cat worshipping cult. That was sort of like how we got there, where it's sort of we had to figure out, okay, what are the sort of vulnerabilities that we could exploit here? But yeah, as opposed to Harmony Square, our first game that came out in late 2020, that we were that game is much more difficult to localize. But with Cat Park, we had this incredible art set that we could sort of swap out and figure out how to adapt the plots, excuse me. And so we were able to do that for Sub-Saharan Africa with an Amharic translation and localization, and with Hindi, and now the Arabic version.
I think that's incredible, and again, it's respecting cultures, it's meeting people where they are, and what was the impact? What was the reach like?
Yeah, both of those games, Harmony Square and Cat Park, have combined been played almost 1 million times, right? So, and we know that they work. And when U.S. embassies are sort of looking for low-lift activities to do at places called American Spaces, which are sort of like community centers that the embassies run, this is something that they can do that's low lift and easy to talk about, and then can be built into sort of other conversations.
Right, it's a conversation starter,
yeah.
Right, and you build those facilitated guides and conversations. I mean, I think what happens outside the game is, obviously is as important to what happens in the game.
Yeah, can I actually have a quick story here?
I love your stories. I think everyone is enjoying your stories.
We ran a game jam in May of 2023. It was in Malaysia, but it was ASEAN-wide, so the ASEAN countries, there are 13 of them that I don't think I could rattle off right now. But one team, they were from Malaysia and Brunei, and they created a game about financial literacy, but their target audience were older adults, parents and grandparents. So what they did is they took that game, trained 35 university students, and then each of those students then went home and played that game cooperatively with a parent or grandparent.
Intergenerational, that's great.
It was awesome. We were like, oh, okay, this is the secret sauce. How do we do this over and over and over again?
That's really great. Carla, I want to hear about, you mentioned to me earlier about another project you're working on to help a not-for-profit, right?
Yes, yeah.
Please tell us about it.
Sure. It's called the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. And so they're actually a network of investigative journalists that are dealing with some of the most interesting stories around organized crime and corruption in our world. And they've partnered with the film industry to start an initiative called Floodlight Summit, which is fiction in the public interest. And so essentially what they're doing is working with filmmakers to adapt these investigative journalism stories into films, and they're really interested in how this can be used and applied within games as well. So we're partnering with them and starting the Floodlight Games initiative, which is essentially going to be collaborating with different developers. We're going to start by hosting a game jam around this topic, and so every participant in the jam will receive a catalog of these really sensitive investigative journalism exposés, and then explore how they can utilize these to inspire some games. So I'm really excited about that, and yeah, we'll be launching that around June, so it's quite soon.
All right, great. Let's talk about the power of game jams. Because Paul, both of you have been involved in game jams for the last several years, and it's an amazing strategy to reach developers. Tell me a little bit about the projects you've been involved in.
Yeah, I've been able and lucky enough to support game jams all over the world with the State Department. And from a State Department perspective, why game jams are intriguing are, one, these are games for social impact. So the games that are being made are about the social issues that the State Department cares about that might be too sensitive for the embassy to talk about directly. So in that ASEAN game jam, there was a game about sexual health. And that was like a real conversation starter. It was like, wow, okay, I don't know if we could put U.S. Embassy Kuala Lumpur branding on this, but like, good on them for making this. But then the other piece is the business development, right? So I think the technical skills, when I've traveled all over the world and met devs, right? The technical skills, the animation, it's all there. The pieces that are missing are the business pieces, right? And that's where the U.S. Embassy can come in and bring gaming experts, biz dev folks from the United States to the foreign country to try and talk about and share that expertise. And so, right, you're sort of checking these two boxes of your public diplomacy goals. What are the issues that you want to talk about, as well as your economic development goals?
Games for Change, we've been interested in supporting that as well, developing community and gaming ecosystems in different countries while also inserting this idea of you can make games about positive things. Right, and it's so whether it's younger people coming out, you know, the next generation of game developers, to always think about the social impact and the responsibility that they have and should impart in terms of their career paths. So let's talk, because we only have about 5 minutes left, and I don't know if we're going to have a chance for Q&A, but we'll see. But let's talk about the public-private sector, right? How game developers can work with NGOs, how they can adapt practices within their games, and because I do think that that model is so powerful, and both of you have been involved in that. Carla, how did you meet the people at the Organized Crime Intervention Unit?
Yeah, so that was actually through CineReach, whom I know you know, and actually just piggybacking quickly on the game jam thing, because we also organize game jams, and last year we hosted one that was themed around justice, and we had 100 developers from 20 countries participate, and it was really cool to see the projects that emerged from that. There was one around reproductive rights. There was a team from Palestine that created a cultural, peaceful Palestine-based game, and we just did one with Trevor Noah's production studio, which was about climate consciousness, because they actually are rooted in Trevor's South African roots, right? And Day Zero, which is the name of their production studio, which is based on the water shortage crisis. And we just got back the results. There were 200 developers from 35 countries this time. So, just echoing what you were saying around like being able to have a global reach. And but going back to your point about partnerships with nonprofits, in this particular case with OCCRP, that was just through CineReach, because the organization that we ran these game jams with, they're a media incubator, but they're actually a nonprofit themselves. And so one of the cool things that's come out of the jams has been that CineReach is actually investing in further developing some of the prototypes that emerge. So we're exploring alternative models for how we can really get these developers from 0 to 1, right? So the beauty of the game jam is that it allows developers to take risks that you might not necessarily be able to within a more structured studio environment. And then beyond that, right, like who would fund these games, right? Like, for example, in our case, right, it's a provocative topic, it's a sensitive subject matter. Traditional publishers might not be able to fund them. So nonprofits are a great way, to do that, because they want to commission work that, that is meaningful. And one of the challenges that I've seen in game development in general, as it relates to, and I'm sure Susanna and Paul, you've seen this as well, is like sometimes there are nonprofits or cultural institutions that want to develop a game, but they might be too didactic or pedagogical and not as compelling or engaging. And then on the flip side, you have game developers who might not be thinking about these subject matters. And so we're really trying to be at the center of the Venn diagram where, it's entertainment first, but it is like focused on these subject matters. And there's always the expression of like putting the spinach in the brownies, essentially, right?
Chocolate covered broccoli.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I know that's a lot of the work that you do too.
Yeah. I can contribute there too. We fully believe in game jams. We've been running them for a long time, and are now focused on youth, bringing young people into gaming environments, and collaborating and making games about social issues. So each year, as part of our Games for Change Student Challenge that reaches kids as young as 10 up through college age, they're invited to learn how to make games and then make games around particular social issues. And each year, we partner with NGO or a UN organization that can provide that information. And I will say that the UN agencies are deeply interested in how they can leverage games to help with their missions. And I would say that if there's real interest, to engage with our community, WHO is doing a major initiative around mental health with the games industry on September 24th. And I will be talking about that later if anyone wants to get involved. But it's like an invitation to get involved. They want this industry to engage. And there are so many others that are involved in that. I can't believe we're close to the end. Oh my God, we're just getting started. But maybe. All right.
Through the lunchtime anyway.
Well, let's. Okay. Well,
Oh,
I don't want to keep anyone from
Because
their
No
food.
lunch for you.
Don't get talked about very much.
Yeah.
Given the job market right now, the youth globally, they don't get hired even for intern, right? So somehow their creativity, their sense of belonging to the community, to the society, have a way of channel it out. And I think the game jam of this for this course is awesome.
Yeah. So should we open it up for questions? Is there anything that I didn't cover that you were hoping to impart?
Yeah, I have so many stories, but like
Yes.
I'll use them if you guys ask
Fine,
questions.
Paul,
Then I'll
after.
tell you my stories.
Does anyone have any questions?
Any questions around here? Yes, please.
It's more about sustainability. So you're talking about like, well, if you have a game jam, how do you go from that to making a more marketable game? Because making games is not cheap. So is it either like the expectation is it's going to be a really small game, or just if you could share your perspective?
Well, Carla, you are walking the walk right now.
Yeah, gosh,
Walking the
it's a
talk.
challenge for sure. But in the case with Cinereach, for example, they have their own sort of narrative workshop process that they've applied within films, and so we're now going through that with, for example, the prototypes that we're further developing, and it requires, I think. It's not entirely dissimilar to just starting out as an indie developer, making a little prototype, and then further developing that to a vertical slice, but we're just providing the support, right? Financial resources, but also because some of these are tackling, real world issues. The nice thing that, Cinereach has been bringing in, for example, is like experts in the subject matter, right? Because we talk about making sure you're going to the source if you're going to be conveying a real world subject. And there are actually a lot of examples of game jam games that have developed into fully commercially viable games, which is really exciting. And I think that we need to explore that more because of how unsustainable the practices are in traditional industry and in larger studios, and see like how can we get the right financial backers and sponsors to support these initiatives. So, for example, with Trevor Noah's production studio, they're also interested in further investing in those prototypes, and same with OCCRP for the projects that come out of that jam. So, it's an experiment. I think it's definitely challenging, but we are along the path, and we'll see how things go. So.
Do you have a story?
Of course, I've got stories. Well, and I think you and I both have a story about Cote d'Ivoire.
I was going right there. I was going right there.
But as a part of how we were starting to think about game jams, is we did not want to leave it at the end of the game jam. We wanted to make sure that there was follow-up funding, as well as that a core piece of sort of the whole week-long activity, if that's how long it was that business development piece, right? Like how to take your prototype and keep going and take it to market. Really quick story time then. The first game jam that I worked on, it was the Cultural Heritage Game Jam. This was all about games celebrating cultural diversity, raising awareness about the threats to heritage from theft, looting, trafficking, destruction, and climate change, as well as how threat actors are abusing cultural heritage for political narratives. So that game jam had 900 participants from 72 countries who created 116 games. The best game that came out of that was a collaboration between Peruvian, Swedish, and Iranian devs. And now that game, which is all about Chachapoya cultural heritage, which is from Peru, is in the Museum of the Chachapoya. It's like a core piece of their, explaining materials.
I also will say about developing community and finding funding for these kind of impact-related projects. It's a little bit of a self-plug, but I will say that the Games for Change community overall is that kind of cross-sector hub of people who are making games, researching games, applying games to different fields, funding games, and we do have an annual event that's coming up, June 26th and 27th in New York City. We do have a whole track on civic and social issues, as we do on health and wellness and games and learning, and there's some really, really interesting people that are going to be there. We haven't announced it yet, but we will be soon. We have a session on the uncensored library in Minecraft. Right? And Reporters Without Borders head is going to be speaking. I mean, that's just a fascinating example, right? How something can be built so meaningful in a popular platform, which is also a model which is I highly encourage. The numbers are different in terms of how much it costs to make a game. I know the State Department also had a similar concept that we were involved in Roblox, and
Yeah, I mean, the budget for that game was $1 million, which for State Department terms is a lot of money. But yeah, we were thinking about, okay, how can we make a game that can actually reach players where they are, rather than trying to divert players from where they're already spending their time. So let's meet players where they are. So yeah, that game, which was being done with Games for Change and Filament Games and a Ukrainian studio, was all about sort of you as the player are an influencer trying to take over digital billboards over like a very vertically oriented city. So, right, how can you reach very high billboards to spread your fact-based information or dispel false or deceptive information?
Awesome. Great.
all right. If you don't have any other questions,
Okay, I guess we have to
We'll wrap
wrap
up.
up. Thank you so
Okay,
much. And don't
thank
forget
you.
the biggest tip is to get one of these guys as your mentor. Okay? Thank you, Susanna, Carla, and Paul. That was very, very interesting. Give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you. Awesome.